Welcome to Money Mavericks and Mayhem, the podcast where finance meets audacity in a whirlwind of insight and excitement. Join hosts Adri, Bleier and Ryan Duchak as they bring you closer to the stories of risk takers, rule breakers, and boundary pushers who are reshaping the financial landscape. Perfect for seasoned investors, budding entrepreneurs, or anyone curious about the tumultuous world of money. This is Money Mavericks and Mayhem.
All right, welcome back to Money Mavericks and Mayhem, where we dive into the lives of financial mavericks, learn invaluable lessons in personal finance, and uncover the scandals that shook the financial world. I am your host, Adri Bleier, of course, here with my co-host, Ryan Duchak.
Hi, everyone. We've got another exciting episode for you today. We'll start with an interview about John F. Kennedy and move on to explaining fiscal policy, and then finally wrap up with a story of the accidental quadrillion-dollar debt. So let's get started, Adri.
All right. Ryan, okay, so today, as you said, we're talking about John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, who had a significant impact on the country's economic policies. So can you tell us a bit about his background and his contributions to economic policy?
Absolutely, Adri. So John F. Kennedy, often referred to as JFK, was born in 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts. Now, before becoming president, he served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. He was a congressman and then a senator. And he was elected president in 1960, where he served until his assassination in 1963. Now, JFK is remembered not only for his leadership during the Cold War, but for his economic policies, which aimed to stimulate economic growth. And lastly, probably most notoriously, he is remembered for Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, yes. Happy birthday. Yeah. So you have to, I know you know the answer. So was there one gunman, two gunmen, three gunmen? What's the answer with this?
I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you, I think is what I'm supposed to say to that.
Yeah. All right. We'll keep it a secret for now. So, I mean, everybody remembers, I think most people probably today that weren't alive during his presidency really know the conspiracy theories around his assassination. And probably that's about it, besides Marilyn Monroe. But I think it seems like most people really liked him as a president. And of course, you can't please everybody, but what were some of his key economic initiatives, since that's what we're talking about?
One of JFK's most notable economic initiatives was his advocacy for tax cuts to spur economic growth. In his 1962 address to the Economic Club of New York, he proposed significant reductions in income tax rates, and he argued that lower tax rates would increase consumer spending and business investment, leading to job creation and higher economic output. This approach was later implemented actually by his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, and became known as the Kennedy-Johnson tax cuts.
Which, that's the big debate today, right? I mean, it's taxation. And, if you cut taxes, that allows people to have more money, then buy more goods and services. So that does seem to make sense. Now, with higher taxes that are going to the government, if you have a government or an administration that is spending that money wisely, I think there's certainly an argument that the government could maybe perhaps, I don't want to say better, but maybe perhaps more efficiently distribute that money within the country that might need to be spent in different sectors or infrastructure or whatever. But certainly, I think a lot of people today are concerned that their tax money isn't going to the benefit of the citizens of this country. And I think that's it's a good debate to have. But going back to Kennedy, how did those policies how did it impact the economy?
Well, in your debate that was a good choice of words. In one comment you made about as long as the government is using those tax dollars efficiently, that's the key with those sides of that argument of with JFK. You had an argument of cutting taxes, more money in the people's pockets to spend to spur the economy. Or the flip side of the argument is higher taxes, more government employment and government using those funds in order to stimulate the economy. And again, I don't have the answer of which is particularly right. I have thoughts and opinions on it, but at the end of the day, both sides could be right as long as both are done efficiently in a good manner, because you can't cut taxes too much where our roads are falling apart and some of the essential services we need aren't available, but you can't tax people too high because then they can't use their money to spur on the economy. So looking at JFK in the Lincoln Kennedy tax cuts, they were highly successful. After the cuts, unemployment was reduced, and they also helped to spark a period of robust economic growth. GDP rates increased, and the tax cuts also contributed to a surge in consumer confidence. So the consumer sentiment was improved as well. So Kennedy's policies demonstrated the power of fiscal measures in managing economic performance.
Yeah, it's a really interesting debate. To your point of consumer confidence, and that seems to be where we are right now. Is when we're just talking about confidence, right? Is okay. Who do you put confidence in? Are you putting confidence in our federal government? Well, unfortunately, lately they don't seem, right? And we don't know the whole story. So, but from my perspective, I should say, and I talk to a lot of folks, I try not to be, this is not a political show, but political, concepts are going to float in. And I try to be balanced as I possibly can. And I have a lot of friends that are liberal and a lot of friends that are conservative. Both sides are, from the people that I talk to, and obviously that's a very small sect of a very large population, but seem to have the same or similar concerns about, okay, one side says, no, I don't want to pay more taxes because I can spend my money better. The other side says, I'm willing to pay more taxes because there are people falling through the cracks and we should, help those people. And I get both sides of the coin, but if the regulatory body isn't doing their part to help the people that are falling through the cracks, and you hate to say, forget that country right now that's in disarray or needs help, because we need help, but it is a lot like family, right? I mean, whoever's listening out there, if you have a family and it comes down to you or your neighbors, well, guess what? You should probably take care of you and your family before you take care of your neighbors. And once you are strong and your family is strong and healthy, then you can go and take care of your neighbors. But if you're weak and starving, you can't take care of your neighbors, right? It's the same thing with an airplane and you put your mask on before you put your kid's mask on. It's not that you love yourself over your kids. Most parents would say, no, I'd give the mask to my kid before I'd give it to myself. But you can't help your kid if you can't breathe and help them, right? If you're suffering. So I think that's a problem today where we're taxes are not as high as they've ever been, but they're pretty high. And then we watch in my opinion, we're watching our government today spend the tax dollars in not the most efficient way for the citizens of this country. And so you're saying, well, in that case, I don't want to spend I don't want to pay your taxes. And that's what I hear from a lot of people. What are we paying taxes for today? To float over somewhere else where we have starving children on the streets, our veterans aren't being taken care of. You can go through a whole lot of, the border, a lot of different options where I understand that this type of scenario becomes very attractive to citizens of saying, no, I am better. I can manage my money better than the federal government can. So it just seems like to me that, JFK's economic vision and the policies, they obviously have had an impact on our economy and the way we think of our economy and pretty much how we think of fiscal policy, which we're going to talk about now, or next, I should say. Do you have any other insights before we move on to the next segment? It can be dangerous. It's a dangerous conversation in some sense.
It really is a dangerous conversation because I agree with you. I would love to end world hunger. I would love to solve all the world's problems. But I also am a big believer that you have to take care of number one first. And if our current America is not the Mecca right now. We have problems in our own country that we need to solve. And we need to help ourselves and get ourselves on the right path before we solve everybody else's problem. And the other thing is we're spending money we don't have. It's not like we have this mass stockpile of fortune that we're just tapping into to help others. We're borrowing money to give to somebody else. And that's where I have slight issues with, but at the same time, I'm fully cognizant of what happens if you don't help some of these people. And it's not even just the human decency part of it. Like, to pick out Ukraine right now, what's going on over there, and take apart, like, obviously I don't want any innocent people to die in the world. That shouldn't happen. So exclude that part of the conversation and just look at it from a pure, should we help them fight off Russia or not? Some people argue this isn't our fight, we shouldn't be involved in it. I can see that argument. Other people argue, well, if Russia takes over Ukraine freely, where are they going next? What's the domino effect? If they take Ukraine, then they're going to go into Poland, then they're going to go into the rest of Europe, and we're going to have World War III. That could be correct. So is it and again, this goes back to, I think a lot of our conversations are about the Monday morning quarterback of after the fact. It's very easy to say you did this right or you did this wrong. But in the middle of it, what is the answer? And it's a very dangerous conversation. There is no correct answer. You have uncharted territories and you don't know how people or countries are going to react. But it does create a tough debate in what is the right thing. Should we tax the rich? What is their fair share? In the same conversation of both sides of an argument. If should successful people be in effect penalized and have to pay additional money to our government in tax dollars in order to make it so that someone who is less successful financially doesn't have to, and that wealthy person can support that poor person? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And there's no clear-cut answer is ultimately what I'm trying to say. It's not as simple as yes or no, because there goes, what happens if you play that game, and what happens to go on the far conservative side of it? What happens if you stop every social program? Well, the poor people, if we have no social programs, the people who are unemployable or unemployed, and we're not helping them, and they need to put food on their table for their families, what are they going to do? They're going to come take food, is what it's going to get to eventually. So by not helping them, you could increase crime, you could increase theft, you could make our society more dangerous. By helping them too much, you could make them feel entitled and perpetuate the unemployed system. That's the other argument to it. So it's finding that middle ground in managing those services efficiently is the hardest thing to do. It changes. That's constantly changing as to what that, and that's why we have tax rates that change and tax codes and tax laws and everything like that change. I think the easiest argument to make is for a flat tax, but that's an easy argument to make. But in the same thing of putting that into effect, it's not as simple. It's not as simple as saying, well, if everyone just pays 20%, we're all equal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on paper, that's easy to say, but 20% off the table or off the top of somebody who's earning $1 million a year is much easier for them to absorb than it is for somebody making 50,000. I mean, it's still the same percentage, but with inflation, with cost of goods in necessary expenses, I mean, the cost of, and I know this isn't necessarily a necessity, but the cost of internet isn't proportionate to your income or to your usage. The cost of internet, to get high-speed internet, it's $100 a month, whether you make $1 million a year or 50,000 a year. So that's a lot easier on that millionaire, or the person making $1 million, I should say, than the person making 50,000.
Right.
And
Or food or gas. It's all the same. Or then you say, okay, well then it's quality, right? So if you don't make enough money, you're still penalized, because you know what? You don't get the healthiest ingredients. You don't get the organic ones. You get the Roundup, celery and tomatoes that have been sprayed. And yeah, there's plenty of data now that shows, hey, that's not the best for your health. Is it better than processed food? Probably. But if you can have pure, locally grown organic type of vegetables, well, there's a premium for that. So
the cheapest food in our system is the worst for you.
Absolutely. If you look at McDonald's, you look at these, so I've said this a bunch, and I think maybe just even in the last episode, but it becomes the responsibility of the regulatory body to say, okay, and that's the only way free market capitalism works. Free market capitalism is a great system as long as you have that independent regulatory body to kind of keep that playing field level. And it's not a level of outcome, right? It's not that everybody's outcome is going to be the same, but it's that everybody gets to play the same game. So when we're talking about fiscal policy and taxes, well, should the rich pay more? Okay, how about we just start with a level playing field, right? And this was love, hate, Trump, don't care about Trump, doesn't matter. But his point is, yeah, I didn't pay as much taxes as most people did, or no taxes, depending on who you talk to. But because I use the laws the way that they are, if the laws help wealthy people not pay taxes, those laws should be changed, right? There shouldn't be loopholes. So forget about who should pay what tax at this point. It's just, let's just make it level.
Yeah, what's the old saying? Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah,
like it's. I don't blame him for assuming he's doing everything by the book and following the tax code. If he can set it up so he pays zero in taxes, that's not his fault. I mean, and you can go down the rabbit hole and argue there's a social contract, so on and so forth, which I do believe to an extent. But when you were talking about regulatory bodies, you said independent and fair. And as long as they are, then yes, I do abide by the social contract and believe in it. But when they aren't, then it's harder for me to get behind of if I knew or any waste and it was being, if our tax dollars were being used like a business would, I can support paying higher taxes a lot better. If I know that my tax dollars are not being used efficiently or effectively or even responsibly, to be blunt, then it's a lot harder for me to get behind writing that check and saying, well, even just because the code says you don't owe any taxes, you should still pay them. That's really hard to tell somebody. Change the code,
Right.
fix the problem. But that's the solution, fixing the problem. It's not just pointing your finger and saying he's a bad person for not paying taxes. Now, if he's not paying taxes because he's breaking laws, yes, now you're a bad person. That's a whole different topic. And I personally feel that there are way too many loopholes. It's hard because, again, nothing is black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And you make laws, you make tax code based on the masses. Well, what about this very unique situation? Well, I don't know. And there are so many different one-off unique situations where they've just expanded the tax code and expanded and expanded. And now you create these loopholes, these tax havens in all different aspects that I believe that's where we need the overhaul. Overhaul the tax code.
Yep.
Change it. I don't know how to. I'm not going to pretend I'm smart enough to rewrite it.
Right.
But it needs to be changed at the very least. And that's where the debate should be, not just how much they're paying in taxes. And this is why all politicians drive me up a wall. Don't tell me about your plan, show me your plan. The fact that politicians on both sides can run saying they're going to do something and there's nothing to hold them accountable to do that, or nothing for them to show us how they're actually going to do that, is absolute banana land to me. The fact that we're okay with that. They can just say, I'm going to tax the rich, or I'm going to give you tax cuts. But what? How?
Yeah.
Like that right now, the big political argument is Social Security and Medicare funding. And I'm going to change this. Well, how? Because we know in the past, both Social Security and Medicare have been worked around. They've made laws to borrow funding and take funding and divert things and change things. And really, they've made it a game of three-card Monte, basically. And so there's a problem with each of those social programs that needs to be addressed. Just saying, I'm going to cut Social Security, that's not the solution. We need to fix the whole system inside of it. And it's the same thing with tax code, same thing across the board. But the politicians, instead of just running saying, I'm not going to do this or I am going to do this, tell me why and how.
Right.
That's what's important.
And the problems, I'm not a political science major or anything like that, but it just seems like all these problems, it boils down to the regulatory body and saying, okay, you cannot have a purchased regulatory body. So yes, your super PACs, your special interests, all of that has to go away. Right. Yes. And that's the only way it's going to work, because nobody wants to pay taxes. I mean, at the end of the day, we all, I'm not a necessary proponent that all tax is theft, right? Because we need taxation. We need, to your point earlier, infrastructure, roads, these things need to be taken care of. Social programs to whatever extent they need to be taken care of. Our veterans need to be taken care of. Homeless people need to be taken care of. Our education, I don't want to say the education system is broken. That's a whole different situation. But certainly the loans
need some work.
Definitely need some work. But if I could dictate where my tax dollars went, I'd be much happier, even if it was the same amount. But to say, okay, I have to pay, let's just say I have to pay 50% of tax, on every dollar. Well, if there was some kind of system that says, okay, 25% no matter what goes into the general fund, but then with your other 25%, you can choose what is important to you. So I don't think that these kids should be paying 7% on their loans. I don't think that college should necessarily be free. There's certainly a debate about maybe a state college, okay, where we're paying taxes to help that state, but private colleges shouldn't be free. But the loans should not be at 7% or whatever they are at now. Maybe an argument of max out at 1% just to cover administrative expenses. But same thing, I would rather my money go to help veterans who fought for this country, right? Fought for their freedom, a lot of times over lies. That's a whole different scenario. But, they shouldn't be left out in the dust. Homeless children, whatever your hot button is, we should be able to dictate our money towards there. Anyway, I could go on for hours, but the bottom line, none of this is going to get fixed until somebody's going to fix it from the inside, and there's nobody that's going to fix it for the inside, because the one thing that always ruins all of these, besides communism, really, it becomes greed, right? Because the communists already have, they're already at the top. They're the ones who run it. They have all the money. They have all the power. They have all of it. So when you're capitalism is a great idea and it would work, but it only works with that independent regulatory body, and we're far past there. So I don't know if there's any putting the cat back in the bag. What's that?
We've gone way too far past it from the standpoint of what you're basically saying. You're asking the people who make the rules to voluntarily make a rule that they cannot receive, trying to think of the polite way to put this. I won't say bribes, but contributions that vastly improve their lives. And I'm not dumb enough. I know I don't have all the answers of how to fix it, but I'm not dumb enough to assume that I can go to you and say, Adri, how about you make the decision to cut your income in half for me? I know you made it fully legal to earn the money you're earning right now. I would like you to voluntarily pass a bill that does not allow you to earn half of the money you get. Or the perks that you get. You get a company car, let's say, and I want you to voluntarily choose to no longer get a company car, and you have to pay for your vehicle out of your pocket.
Yep.
If you say yes, what's wrong with you?
And there's so much pressure even if you wanted to say yes, you'd be ousted so quickly.
You're the one. You're the one person that wants to say yes. You have 99 others, or depends on what branch we're talking, you have 300 other people who are voting no. And you're the one who's like, yeah, I'll fall on my sword. It's the right thing to do. Good for you. You have much better morals and ethics than most of the other people in those positions. But now you're out of a job because they put that super PAC money into voting you out of office because you're going against the established system. We don't want that.
Yeah.
We don't want to take food out of our own pockets.
No, we're public servants. We only make, we go in with nothing. We only come out with like $150, $200 million. It's fine. Nothing to see here.
Like there's so many aspects in our system of it's not like the whole politicians with trading securities. It's very easy. I can't think of a valid argument of why politicians should be allowed to trade stocks.
They should definitely not. They should,
especially when they're voting on bills and rules and things that benefit the companies that are behind those stocks. Like whoever says, yes, Nancy Pelosi should be able to purchase a stock in Apple the week before she knows they're about to pass a law that allows Apple to triple their revenue. No one in their right mind is going to say that's good. But you're asking Nancy Pelosi to create a bill to not allow herself to do that and enrich herself. She's never going to do that. And that's not an indication against her.
It's human greed. That's the problem that's always going to rise to the top. I understand it.
I want you to pass a bill. Like, let's be honest. No politician should be in their 90s. Come on, you should be retired. Your mental capacity isn't there. You're out of touch, so on and so forth. For the majority. There are
almost for all of them, because even there's topics like they're talking about AI. Oh, this was the topic with social media a few years back when nobody even knows what they're talking about up there. Yeah. They don't even know the verbiage of. They're trying to pass laws, and they have zero idea what they're even talking about. It was the most embarrassing thing to watch. Not that I'm not really a Zuckerberg fan. I don't know Zuckerberg, but like from at least a public figure standpoint, I don't like the business model. I get the business model, but when they're asking these questions and he's on stand with his lizard eyes, that was pretty funny. They're asking these questions like, okay, how do you tell me you don't know anything about social media or technology without actually saying that? And how can you get up there and even start to ask these questions knowing you know nothing about it and you're the one who's going to make these laws? Yeah. It makes no sense.
But for them to pass a bill having term limits, you're asking all the people who are getting a benefit to get rid of their benefit.
Mm-hmm. Never going to happen.
Put that into law. It's never going to happen. I don't know the solution. I would love to say we just rip down the establishment and start over. That's not a realistic situation that can occur. Let's all vote them all out. And so we're going to vote every single politician out and trust that all the new people who are running to get in aren't going to do the same exact thing. I mean, I don't know this, but my assumption is you have that bright-eyed, bushy-tail first-term congressman or senator who's coming in to make changes, and they get their first week in office, and somebody takes them out to dinner and puts a hand on their shoulder and says, listen here, let me tell you how this thing works.
Yep.
You want to get anything done here? You got to play by the rules. This is how the game works, and this is what we do, and you have to do this to get this. I ignorantly, for the longest time, looked at it and said, why can't you just vote on a bill on its merits? And I still believe that. Why can't you vote on something based on its pure merits? But that's my wish. The way it works, though, is it's all a negotiation. If you want me to vote for your bill, what are you going to give me in return? And it's a back and forth constantly of, hey, remember when I voted yes for what you wanted passed to help your people of Montana? Well, now my people in Philadelphia want this. So you need to vote for that. And it's the back and forth and the give and take. And it's the political world that we're in right now is very challenging. And it's there's no right answer amongst any of it. And it's the same thing about fiscal policy, what we started, and we've gotten a little bit off topic, but it's tax cuts and fiscal policy. It's economic policy. It's political policy. It all works together in unison of how do we have the great America again, the American dream. That's why people come here.
Right.
That's what
and the kids today,
we want freedom, but we want a good country. There's a give and take. And I think the misconception is we all envision this utopian society. That the problem is everyone's utopia is different. My definition of utopia is completely different than yours. Mm-hmm. So how do we get as a general society in a world society? So we have US and then the whole world in greater scale to our own individual utopias. You can't.
No, you can't please everybody. I mean, it would be nice to, the Constitution is great, but it seems like what's missing there is an actual mechanism for the people to not physically overthrow the government, but overthrow those bills from a voting perspective. Because yes, we have voting. I know a lot of people aren't confident that even is taken into consideration right now. I don't know whether that's true or not. But if there was like a specific mechanism where we could poll everybody, but then you get back to the problem, like, how aware are people of what's going on?
Yeah.
I don't think the vast majority of people are all that aware.
Well, the other thing is, to what end? Because in my opinion, the Constitution does have the mechanisms in place to vote out somebody if they're not voting the way you want. The way the Constitution is set up and in the way our political system is set up is, I'm a constituent of my senator. So if my senator doesn't vote the way I want them to be voting on bills and doesn't pass things, in theory, I can vote him or her out. And that's the mechanism in place. If you don't abide by your constituents, you will be removed from office and somebody new will be voted in. Where it falls off, in my viewpoint, is there is no mechanism to ensure that. Right. My problem is, I don't know, again, the solution, because we are such a litigious and ridiculous society. Am I going to throw a temper tantrum? Like, what's the mechanism for me to be able to vote somebody out if it's not every 2 or 4 years? If I can call in, and we've seen it with, what is it, the House, where the Republicans are constantly throwing out their majority leader. And they changed it so one person can bring them up to throw them out. If we did that on a societal level, at a local congressional level, are they going to have to fight re-election campaigns once a week?
Right.
It's because not everyone has the same utopian agenda or viewpoint. So if I want to vote you out for voting yes to this bill, and then you change and then the guy down the street from me wants to vote you out for voting no to it. So where does it end? It
doesn't.
The problem. Right. I just wish we could hold people accountable for what they say they're going to do. That's where I have an issue with the Constitution, I think, is there's no mechanism in today's world where a politician can say, if you elect me, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. They get elected. They do not do one of those 4 items.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. There's no recourse. There's no other than voting them out. But to your point, how many people actually pay attention to that? Mm-hmm. Or do they just vote down the line, especially locally? Do you just vote Democrat or vote Republican, not knowing what they stand on? Because it's a full-time job to research every single candidate, every single election.
For sure. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we're probably not going to come up with any changes. We can come up with a lot, but unfortunately, none of them are going to be implemented. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to probably something that's very confusing to people is fiscal policy and what that means. So let's talk about that when we get back.
Sounds good.
Best Ever Granola is a woman-owned, Pittsburgh-based company specializing in small batch gluten-free and vegan granola. They rely on the power of simple ingredients, organic gluten-free rolled oats, pure PA maple syrup, organic unrefined cold-pressed coconut oil, and a variety of raw nuts and seeds. It is, well, the best ever. Find their original dark chocolate chia as well as seasonal offerings at over 90 retailers regionally. Best Ever Granola is not affiliated with LPL Financial or the Monteverdi Group.
All right, Adri. So we just got on a tangent for a while, so let's dial into fiscal policy. It's a term we often hear in discussions about government and economics, but can you explain what fiscal policy is and the inner workings of it, so to say?
Yeah. So I think one of the, what's confusing to people, because I'll talk to people and I'll say, I'll say fiscal policy and monetary policy, and a lot of people think they're the same thing. They're certainly interconnected, but fiscal policy refers really to the use of government spending and taxation from using the or from influencing the economy. Whereas monetary policy, we kind of talked about more monetary policy last episode when we were talking about central banks' use of, right? So that's more of monetary policy, like quantitative easing was more of a monetary policy than a fiscal policy. So it is one of the main tools used by governments to manage economic performance. The two primary components of fiscal policy are, again, as I said, spending, government spending, and then taxation. So bringing in money through taxation and spending money from those taxes.
Yeah, but so explain to our listeners how do these components affect the economy? Yeah. It goes a little bit deeper than just spending and taxation.
No, it doesn't, Ryan. That's all there is. Have you watched the news? Just spend. We don't even need taxation anymore. They just print money. Now, so government spending could directly stimulate economic activity by perhaps creating jobs, increasing demand for services and or goods. For example, spending on infrastructure, like we've been talking about, can lead to job creation in construction and related industries, right? So simple, a bridge, for example. I mean, that's kind of a basic, more locally done, but you could use those tax dollars to rebuild or fix a bridge. So you're going to have contractors come in, work on that project. Does that make sense from a spending perspective?
Yeah, in like thinking back in time. So you mentioned that bridge being a local project, but like building the railway system or the interstate system.
Yes.
Now the government's actually hiring people in like my grandfather, pardon my ignorance, and my grandfather's probably rolling over in his grave that I can't think of what the CCC camp stood for. But when he was like 14 or 15, he left home to work in these camps, and they were for basically poor people who couldn't feed their families. You went to these CCC camps and helped build America's roadways and train rails and things like that. And they fed you, they housed you, they clothed you, and they paid you. Mm-hmm. So like that's stimulating the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. My great grandfather from Italy, from the boat, worked on the railroads, so same kind of thing. Not that they paid much, but
but they housed them and clothed them. They housed them. They didn't need to steal food,
right?
In clothes. I mean, I'm thinking of Gangs of New York, but in that time frame, your grandfather wouldn't have had to have joined a gang and robbed people or hurt people even potentially just to survive. Mm-hmm. He could work for the government to build that infrastructure.
Yep, exactly. So then on the flip side, then you have taxation, right? So that ultimately affects the amount of disposable income for individuals and businesses, I suppose, to have, right? So we talked about that. Well, okay, lower taxes. We have now more disposable income. JFK and his presidency, lower tax rate, so people had more money, spurring economic growth, which I personally am a fan of. But again, that's a long time debate. So
we're gonna have to debate no taxation. You know how that's been floating?
Yeah.
I want to debate that with you, maybe today or at some point.
Yeah, I mean, no taxation would be, well, I'd actually probably, it's interesting. Higher taxes can also reduce them, but higher taxes could give more money to the government, this regulatory body, which could then potentially, if they cared, could create more jobs and kind of force economic activity, just like you were talking about with railroads, right? I mean, we don't need railroads anymore or interstates, but whatever infrastructure projects are going on, they could use tax dollars to help grow the country. They can also use tax dollars to give it to other countries. And there's certainly a debate there. But I like this idea of no taxes versus some taxes.
Yeah. Well, so explain, and this is well, I guess it's still kind of on topic. If we eliminated taxes, income taxes, or I guess I'll just leave it at, if we eliminated taxes, how does that work? How does the government make money to spend that?
Well, the government wouldn't need to make money per se at that point, right? I mean, well, let's go down this rabbit hole. So now you privatize all industry, okay? So now which is dangerous, right? Because I mean, somebody's going to have to take on those projects. So on one hand, you could say, well, the government's inefficient at the use of money, being stewards of our tax dollars. I would argue that they're inefficient. I don't think that's too far off.
No, not in my opinion.
From a privatized standpoint, okay, now you're talking about greed, and sometimes you're talking about greed versus human life. So what if you privatized? I mean, a really good example of privatization that should not be privatized is prisons.
Yes.
I mean, that's disgusting. It's gross.
Yeah, making prison for profit, making hospitals for profit.
Bad.
That's where greed can come in, and I'm not a fan of either of them.
And they don't become now the outcome is inefficient, right? So you have these inefficiencies. So what if you imagine your local fire station became privatized? Okay, well, it's a lot cheaper for us, if we're within 5 miles of the firehouse, that's a better business model for us. If we have to go fight fires, whatever, we're going to charge you, if your house burns down, we're going to charge insurance, or however they're going to get paid, right? However, because they're going to get paid. Now, Ryan, you live out a little bit farther. It's harder for us to get here. So if your house burns down, or if there's 3 houses burning at the same time, these ones are more profitable than yours are because yours is harder to get to and farther away. Maybe we won't get to your house, right? So, I mean, that's not a very well thought through argument.
And what if that's where I don't believe you can eliminate all taxes.
I don't either.
Because you get into with that rabbit hole you were in, you get into a situation of first world country versus third world country, so to say. What happens if I don't pay my privatized fireman's bill and my house catches on fire? Do they watch my house burn down and cook some s'mores on it because I didn't pay my bill? Do you let my family die? Do you let all of my possessions go up in smoke? And to me, that's the third world country viewpoint versus the first world of helping thy neighbor in being that social contract and being a good society. And it's the same thing with the hospital. When you've privatized insurance, if I can't afford insurance, does that mean if I get infection that I should just die because I have no insurance, so I can't get treated? It's impossible to answer, to solve those problems, because at what point do you cut it off? What's the point of, why should I pay for insurance? If I can just go into the hospital and get it for free, why would I pay for it? If we privatize the fire department, why would I pay my bill if they're still going to put the fire out if my house burns down? There's just a ton of rabbit holes. So I think the concept of no taxation is not feasible in our society, but I do see an argument for no income taxes and the government you would have to limit your social services a little bit, I think, but looking at states that have no income tax, and their economies are still doing just fine because they have higher sales tax rates. They putting tariffs on. One argument is you want to make America a better manufacturing company, bring manufacturing back here. If you increase tariffs on foreign products being imported, that's going to stimulate American entrepreneurship back into manufacturing because it'll be cheaper to buy from here. And that's going to stimulate our economy to an extent. But again, it goes further into other build America. You look at the world, we are a world economy, whether you like it or not. In right or wrong, you go into the child labor stuff in China or countries like that. And should we be buying from companies who support this? Absolutely not. We shouldn't. Do you want to pay $200 for a t-shirt though? Well, I can't. Again, not as easy as it sounds.
It's definitely not as easy as it sounds. And it seems like, eventually those things would probably even out, but it's the immediate pain, right? Nobody likes pain. So it's the same thing with quantitative easing that we were talking about before. You could let everything collapse. There's going to be a tremendous amount of pain for everybody across the world. Most likely, there are most people across the world, but it will reset, and then you have something to build back on. But nobody wants the pain. So it's the same thing with taxation. Now, I agree with you. I don't think that, there's two, it always goes back to the argument of an independent regulatory body that is not for profit. And you can argue that the government's not for profit, but okay, the people that are in the government seem to be for profit. So where is too much? Whether it's income, like you said, there's an argument for not having income tax. It doesn't matter because they raised the sales tax. So it's the same tax, but it's like we're taxed every step. That's where I say, okay, there is a theft occurring. It's not pure tax. It's not all tax, but if we have, a tiered rate like we do, and you max out at 50%, which I think is too high, but you get rid of the loopholes for billionaires and all of that. And then you're talking about infrastructure, but, my effective tax rate, or a lot of people's effective tax rate, is probably over 50%. Because you got your income tax, but then you go buy something and now you pay tax again. I just paid tax. Why do I have to pay tax on something I want to buy? I paid tax on the money I made. Now I have to pay some tax on something I want to buy. And I buy my house, and I still yet have to pay taxes. I pay taxes on the house, but now I got to pay taxes on the property every year. What the heck? Okay, well, the school district needs, okay, but I pay local taxes. Why am I don't understand. You get to a point where like, this makes no sense. And if they were good stewards of the money, that's one thing. But watching where we are, and that's what I think most people, or many people in this country, are frustrated with the stewardship of the money.
Yes.
Like potholes all over the place. Where's the money going? I just don't want to get a flat tire because that's another $500 that I have to then pay tax on that. Just fix the pothole. It's easier to fix the pothole.
One of the taxes that you also didn't mention is inflation. A lot of people view inflation as a form of taxation.
That's a form of theft.
Yeah.
Taxation. It's definitely taxation, but it's a sneaky thievery type of thing.
Yeah. It's just you're paying more because if you had wage inflation, and that goes back to the whole argument I think we had last show of monetary policy, and more with I just lost my train of thought.
We're talking about inflation and theft, tax.
Yeah. And inflation. What I was going to say is wage inflation not going at the same pace as inflation in the argument about getting back to the gold standard or something of the likes of that. Last show we had talked about that, in how if there was a way to go on and off the gold standard for like extemporaneous events or something. Wage inflation does not go up at the same rate as price inflation, So if I'm earning the same dollars I am today, but something costs me 20% more than it did 3 years ago, that's a tax.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 20% tax that I just got hit with. I can buy less. Thinking inflation, because all of this circles around the kind of the goals of fiscal policy, right?
Yes.
So what are some of, like, go through the goals of fiscal policy?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think traditionally, at least, you're talking about one, probably promote economic growth. You want to reduce unemployment, control inflation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, during a recession, for example, the government might increase spending and or cut taxes to stimulate the economy. All right. So that goes straight to a question of where we are today. But let's talk about conversely. During periods of high inflation, should probably decrease spending or raise taxes to cool down the. But there's a balance there, right? There's always a balance. But if you think about today, okay, you could argue that we're not in a recession. I mean, you could certainly, I mean, from the definition of a recession,
Mm-hmm.
we're not. But are we in the greatest economic boom of all time?
Well, and that's why we're in a somewhat of a unique situation. A lot of the inflation that we're seeing is not particularly due to consumer spending. So, to your point of what you just said, you can increase or decrease government spending and raise taxes to cool down the economy to fight that high inflation. The high inflation is highly due to increased government spending more than consumer spending, which a lot of it was necessary. I'm not saying it was necessarily a bad thing with
Right.
COVID and then tacking on the foreign stuff on top of it is where it changes. Again, I'm not saying it was bad, but a lot of the inflation wasn't because consumers are flying out and buying everything they can find. And then you had the supply chain issues that increased the inflation. So it's not in a vacuum why we have this inflation. To be able to just say, raise taxes and decrease spending, and we'll cool off the economy, because the economy is not exactly running hot right now. It's
Right.
still teetering, in a lot of why the economy is okay is because interest rates are relatively low still. And we're in a very dicey spot of, if they raise taxes to cool down the economy with the inflation that we have, that could be really bad for the economy.
Really bad.
If they don't do it absolutely on point, it would be very easy to make an error of that. Same thing with interest rates. I mean, going into this year, you couldn't talk to anyone in our business or any economist that wouldn't put in writing it. I mean, maybe because of all the compliance we have, you wouldn't put it in writing, but if you were pressed to give an answer of how many times the Fed is going to cut rates this year, 3 was the answer, minimum. 3, possibly 4. And like, without a doubt, basically. And then we get into this year and we're in July right now. We haven't had any rate cuts because it's too dangerous to do it right now.
Yep.
We're not with the inflation and with the current environment we're in. There's too many variables involved. So it's not as simple as just raise taxes, slow down spending. That's the part of fiscal policy that's the easy answer, but then you have to bring in monetary policy and economic policy overall, and find a balance amongst all of this to find the right path forward, or try to find, I should say.
Yeah, I think we're in a really difficult time, and I don't know, maybe just time. I'm not sure what the answer is, because it's like, the normal curve, if you will, is kind of inverted or broken. We don't have a good economy yet, where we've got pretty high tax rates right now. The inflation's out. It's not out of control. Inflation's been way worse. Taxes have been way higher in the past, but people are struggling. People. I talk to a lot of younger people. They just cannot live a life that, not that they're promised, not everybody, but I'm talking about people that came out of college, work, trying to work their way up. But I'm not saying that when you come out of college, you should automatically be able to buy a house, but you should probably be able to afford to rent an apartment. But when you come out of college and you've got $1,000 a month, in just to cover your tuition, your student loans, because you didn't have enough, and the story's always been go to college, you'll make more money. But it's just these folks. I mean, I've talked to 30-some-year-olds who are doing okay. They can't imagine buying a house, right? Because it's just the interest rates are too high. Housing prices are out of control. So you've got prices of most things are out of control. Add in inflation, add in taxes. Most people don't have 2 pennies at the end of a month.
Yeah.
And it's not
and
a
you
great
add
way.
in to me, there's multiple factors to it, obviously, but one of the additional things are the things we've been conditioned to believe are necessities.
Mm-hmm.
So if you went to that 30-something and said, why are you buying $1,000 iPhone then? Get rid of that. Get rid of your cell phone plan. That'll save you $1,000 a year because you're buying a new iPhone every year, because we've been conditioned to think that we have to. And you're spending hundreds of dollars a month on your cell phone plan. Get rid of that. Get rid of cable. Get rid of internet. I can't. We've been conditioned where those are necessities anymore. So on top of all the expenses and everything, people don't want to tighten their belts. And it's there again, there's no right answer. There's no sacrifice. People don't want to sacrifice. We've been told that we go to college, we get out, we can have a BMW and live in a mansion. I had a little harsh reality when I got out of college, and that didn't happen. And I had to work to get there and sacrifice. But it's a huge problem that you can't even afford an apartment and I'm not talking about the Ritz-Carlton of apartments.
No.
Like, I just don't want to live in an area where there's a drive-by shooting every day.
Right.
I want to be able to afford a place where I don't have that. And that's getting increasingly more difficult, if not impossible. And that's disappointing.
And, I get, people are, the whole bootstraps and all that. And you need to work hard. So if you're in a position, try to figure it out. And today it's never been easier in my mind today to do, to start your own business, to do whatever it is that you really want to do. But that doesn't mean it's easy, and that doesn't come overnight. So, some of the things aren't like, internet's, you can argue it's not a necessity, but it kind of is.
But it is.
It is.
Yeah.
A car, okay, you could take the bus. Perhaps. You can live with your parents. I get it. You probably should after school, especially if you have a tremendous amount of student loans. But there's a point where you say, I just want a 1-bedroom apartment, just, or not a studio apartment. I think
that
there was like $1,900 for a studio apartment. I'm sure, to your point, I could go to a dangerous neighborhood and get one for $500, but that's not worth it. And then you say, okay, I worked. I got a good degree, okay, you can work the rest of your life, but is that what we're here for? Just to play into the system, just to be a slave? I mean, because that's really what, when we think about it, we're just well treated, we get paid, but the idea of an economy is people to work, generate goods and services. Other people buy those goods and services, and it's just a round type of thing. But if you can't enjoy your time here on the planet because you're stressed about paying things all day, you're working 80 hours a week, you don't have money to go out to spend an hour or two with your friends, or go have anything other than ramen noodles and Wonder Bread, which you and I both ate when we were in college. We did pay our dues, but I remember one of the first apartments that I had, which was a nice place, and yes, that was a fairly long time ago. It was like $400 a month. And today's money, maybe that's $900 a month, but it's not $1,800 a month.
Yeah, to me, that's the biggest problem. There's no clear path forward. When we were coming up, there was a clear path forward. You tightened your belt, you ate ramen noodles, you lived the hard life, so to say, and worked 60, 80 hours a week. You could achieve what you were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
You could get that $400 apartment. You could do that. Right now, I feel like for the kids coming out of college today, okay, you can live at home. For how long? Because it's going to take you 20 years based on the salary that you can get of living at home to be able to pay off that college debt, and then to be able to afford to live in that apartment. And that's not a clear path forward. No. 20 years is not. If I left college and moved back into my parents for, I would say 5 years is the maximum that would have been anticipated 25 years ago, 20 years ago. That's acceptable. That's a clear path forward. Right now, it's how do I ever do this? And we live in Pittsburgh, which is technically or said to be an affordable city. I see the real estate prices in California, and it's, what do you need to be earning to be able to buy a 1-bedroom condo in LA or someplace that isn't in a drug den?
Yeah.
I mean, a 500 square foot condo is probably $1 million there. And you need 200 grand to put down on that. So how are you going to save up 200 grand when you're being taxed at 12% in the state and everything's incredibly expensive? You can plan on moving back in with mom and dad. That's all well and great, but for how long?
Right.
And I believe, without being in it, my belief is right now, you look at that, crunch those numbers, and it's 10 to 20 years, and praying that you get some huge advancements in your career and get lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, now is the easiest time to start a business and be able to be self-employed and get something off the ground. There are very low barriers to entry into that. But a lot of it has to be lucky to become very successful. And still that clear path forward is very hard to see.
Yes. Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, I feel badly for people. I don't have the fix, We can all come work at the Monteverdi Group.
There you go.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, let's move on from fiscal policy. It's clearly a critical tool for managing the economy. It intertwines with a lot of different aspects, but that was a pretty good breakdown. Let's jump into some mayhem after we've been doom and gloom talking about the American dream right now.
Right. Okay, we'll be back in a moment.
Take a break first.
Endurance sports, swimming, biking, or running, can be a great way to stay healthy and fit, as well as test your physical and mental strength. Having a dedicated coach provides accountability and structure for the athlete's training, ensuring that the healthy lifestyle is maintained. With their guidance and expertise, Victory Multisport coaches are able to challenge athletes to not just reach their personal goals, but dig deeper into themselves and achieve things they never thought were possible, pushing them out of their comfort zone with confidence. They will create a customized training plan and provide motivation when times get hard so you don't lose sight of the desired outcome. Being part of Victory Multisport offers tangible results that allow anyone to surpass their greatest expectations. Reach out to the coaches at Victory at info@victory-multisport.com. That's info at victory-multisport.com. Victory Multisport is not affiliated with LPL Financial or the Monteverdi Group.
All right, so we are back, and Ryan, the story of the accidental quadrillion-dollar debt is bizarre, but it's a fascinating example of financial mishaps. Can you walk us through what happened?
I can. So this incident occurred in 2013 when a gentleman by the name of Chris Reynolds, who was actually from Pennsylvania, he opened his PayPal account, and this is kind of like a movie, I would say.
Yeah.
He found his account balance to, I don't even know how to say it, to quadrillion, 233 zillion. I'm just going to summarize it. I'm going to round it to a little bit over $92 quadrillion,
That's a lot.
which was quickly identified as a glitch in PayPal's system.
I mean, what if you just you saw that and you were like, cash out, cash out, cash out? I don't know. I mean, it's an astronomical amount of money. And I kind of know what's going to happen, but what did PayPal say? I mean, PayPal's like, uh-oh.
Well, I wish I could tell you that Mr. Chris Reynolds took his 92 quadrillion, transferred it to the bank, and lived a blessed life after that. However, PayPal, they quickly corrected the mistake and issued a statement apologizing for the error. But when you think on the surface, it's just one of those movie type situations, but it's actually really concerning.
Mm-hmm.
They had to reassure both Reynolds and the public that there was no actual financial impact. And even though it was resolved swiftly, it brought a ton of attention and curiosity, sparking discussions really about the robustness and then the reliability of our digital financial systems. What happens if that was somebody else's $92 trillion that they accidentally put in his account? How do you prove that?
Right.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think there's been, and I'm, we've talked about Bitcoin and things like that, but I've heard about people stealing other people's, wallets and somehow getting in there. And then how do you really prove that you didn't give it to them or gift it to them or whatever? I don't even know. I mean, that's not my expertise. But yeah, I mean, this whole the idea of going to digital currencies is scary. And because these hackers are so good, and it's always everybody's just chasing everybody else. It's the hackers, then, the CIA or FBI or whomever are counteracting that hack, but then here's another vulnerability, and it's just a cat and mouse game. It seems probably never ending. Maybe AI changes that, but now do you have two competing AIs? I mean, I don't know, but so did this particular incident have any lasting effects?
I mean, vulnerabilities is a good choice of words, because that was mainly the lasting impact. The error, purely technical, had no real world financial consequences. That money didn't get into the economy. It wasn't taken from his employer in error or anything like that. It was a typo, basically. But it did highlight the potential vulnerabilities. Digital financial platforms really served as a reminder of the importance of maintaining and testing robust systems with plenty of redundancies to prevent such errors, because your point of hackers in the cat and mouse game, if we went to a fully digitalized system, which we pretty much have, and I log into my PNC bank account or whatever bank I'm at, and it shows 0, how do I prove otherwise? And if it's an error that it shouldn't be showing 0, and there's a glitch or a hacker took it or whatnot, how do I, as the little guy, prove that I had more money in there? Everything's online.
Yep.
And if the hacker's that good that they wipe that stuff clean, I don't prove that I can't prove I didn't not spend $10,000 yesterday at Target.
Yeah.
How do I prove that wasn't me? I was working all day. Prove it.
Yep.
Well, I can't fully prove that. So it really, this was a humorous but thought-provoking situation about the potential pitfalls we have in the digital age, in the need for financial institutions to have systems in place to have redundancies, basically, to make sure that Chris Reynolds isn't a 92 quadrillionaire. I believe that would make him the richest man on the earth.
Yeah, by far. He'd be the new world order,
right?
But no, and I think it's up to the manufacturers, the banks, the government. They all have to figure this out, and redundancies and everything that you're talking about. Very good points. But in the meantime, as consumers, we need to protect ourselves, and we've talked about this before. So one little thing, and it's a double-edged sword, because don't love credit cards if you don't pay them off. But as we talked about before, if you're using your debit card for everything, start using a credit card for it, right? Your debit card is open. You're going to have to prove that you spent it. With the credit card, it's, I didn't spend it. You guys go fight it, right? You figure it out. So you have a lot more protection with a credit card. Now, there's danger involved that you don't pay it off every month, and you incur those fees. But if you can pay it off every month, it's much better to pay it, because, to your point, how do you prove that you did that, unless we get to another point where we're giving up even more privacy, even giving up more information. So now the banks can track everything you do. I don't know if they can or can't right now, but that would be the only way for them to know, oh, Ryan was at work because we can track him. And here he was. He never went to Target. His computer has no, has no cash or cookies from Target or whatever. I don't know what I'm talking about, but you get my point. Like, the only way to do that is to give up more privacy to institutions that you probably don't want to give those things up to. So the small things you can do is just be very wary, pay attention to your bank accounts, pay attention to your credit, right? Your credit reports, monitor them all the time, and use credit cards where you can instead of debit cards, or just small things that people can do to help prevent themselves from things we were just talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and one other, I'll say technically savvy enough to be listening to this podcast uses online banking in some way, shape, or form. The solution of I just won't use digital stuff is not a viable solution either. Is whether you're using online banking or not, your bank is. So if they had that glitch, if they have anything like that happen, and you're just waiting for your paper statement 30 days later, and then address the situation, a lot of time has passed. And that is much more difficult on you versus having that online access and being able to check your accounts on a relatively frequent basis is still very important.
And if you are, most people are using online banking, I would assume. You can, at least with my bank, both, I have multiple banks, but they all allow you to set up rules to get notifications. So if something's deposited over X amount of dollars or something's spent over X amount of dollars, it could even be $1. I mean, that's a bit much, but
that would be a little aggressive.
Yeah, but you could get a notification every time, there's, $1,000 is spent or whatever your number is, that you could get that notification. And that's definitely helpful just to keep track of what's going on. So that was it. But, I think that accidental $quadrillion-dollar debt example is perfect. It just shows how, small glitches can lead to extraordinary situations. So thanks for talking about that, Ryan.
You're welcome, Adri. It's a interesting story that just underscores the importance of system integrity in the financial world is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that wraps up today's episode of Money Mavericks and Mayhem. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the life of John F. Kennedy, learned valuable insights about fiscal policy, and, at least the intrigued by the conversation we had about the accidental $quadrillion-dollar debt. So, as always, don't forget to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, of course, and a review would be great. So join us next time for more fascinating stories and lessons. And until then, stay savvy and stay safe and have fun.
Take care, everybody.
The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks including possible loss of principal. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC.